Okay, we're just after 10 a.m. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for our quarterly webinar today. I'm David Trepp, partner with BPM, and this morning we're going to talk about how to avoid becoming the next phishing victim. So should be a topic that's near and dear to everyone's hearts, as phishing is a very commonplace attack and we all have a lot of familiarity with it. So before we get started, just a couple quick housekeeping issues. For those attending who are earning continuing ed credit for this course, please note the CPE rules here. We are going to have 3 code words embedded in today's presentation, and they will be in red, bold font and underlined, so be easy to pick out. Please record these words as you see them, and at the end of the class you'll receive an email from Joel here at BPM linking you to SurveyMonkey, and you will have an opportunity to fill in those code words and thereby validate your attendance and get your credits. We are going to encourage questions and comments, so please don't hesitate to speak up or drop a chat message anytime you have a question or comment, and we will accommodate those. We don't have to wait till the end of the presentation for questions. Just a little bit about BPM. For those of you not familiar with us, we've been around since 1986, and we operate headquartered in the Bay Area. We operate across a number of industries and pretty much up and down the West Coast of the United States, as well as a little bit overseas. And we have expertise in all of the typical accounting services, audit, tax, advisory, and so forth. I work in the IT assurance team where we work on hacking systems. So I am a U.S. Army veteran, so I think about defense and things like that as part of my makeup and personality. I've been trained as a scientist, which means I use facts to derive conclusions, not the other way around. I've been a serial tech entrepreneur for a long time. I've been doing penetration testing for over 20 years now, and my personal and professional interests are tied to risk assessment professionally and my own practice in risk management in rock climbing and bicycle touring personally. Now, the perspective we're going to bring to this morning's presentation is important. We are not experts at planning, building, or managing solutions. There are plenty of folks out there who can help you with that type of activity. We are experts at defeating information security controls. So this introductory presentation is really going to take a hacker's perspective on phishing attacks, how a hacker is going to look at them, and we'll look at some examples on how we think defending against phishing can be effective based on our own experience, having performed literally thousands of phishing attacks. We'll bring that experience to bear on how to defend yourself against such attacks. So the presentation is very straightforward this morning. We're going to begin with why social engineering attacks, just a little bit about them, why they're effective or ineffective, how they work. We're going to look at some examples of phishing attacks, mostly just from my own inbox, but we'll grab a couple of headlines as well to look at common phishing attack techniques. And then we'll wrap up with some useful takeaway advice on how to avoid becoming the next phishing victim. Again, please don't hesitate to speak up with questions or comments. We want to encourage getting your questions answered, so no need to wait till the end of the presentation for that. So first of all, why social engineering attacks? Let's start just by defining the common attack vectors. There's lots of ways to attack information systems. Human, physical, and technological are the most common vectors, and they can be used both alone and in tandem with each other. For today's purposes, we're going to talk about human attack vectors, and in particular, phishing attacks and related attacks. Now, phishing is a form of a social engineering attack, and so here we have a definition of social engineering that we like in our office, that Quizlet has there on the web: the use of deception to get individuals to divulge sensitive information. And of course, the intent is to use that information for fraudulent purposes. So very straightforward definition of social engineering. Now, we want to talk a little bit for just a second about why social engineering is so effective. And before we do that, I want to define the term risk or risk assessment within the context of information security. So what you see on this slide here is really the simplest possible formula for assessing risk, where risk is a combination of likelihood and impact. So if we look at the likelihood of an attack being performed or an attack succeeding, those types of things are very important in assessing risk. And of course, impact, what is the result of a successful social engineering attack, is something that is key part of the formula there. So likelihood and likelihood and impact are used to derive our risk assessment. Now, when it comes to social engineering attacks are very likely to succeed. So if we look at our formula, likelihood and impact, one of the reasons why social engineering attacks are so popular is that they are likely to meet with success. The real bottom line reason why social engineering attacks are so likely to be successful is that there is an innate assumption of truth or assumption of veracity that embeds our civilization. We could not exist in societies if we didn't operate under the assumption of truth. We assume that our interactions with other human beings are true, otherwise we would never be able to get along. And that assumption of truth is exactly what social engineers take advantage of in their attacks. And the fact of the matter is that as human beings, we're still in version 1.0 of human consciousness. And there have been no update schedule published that we know of. And so we're stuck in version 1.0 of human consciousness with that assumption of truth, and we're going to remain susceptible to social engineering attacks. Another facet of the likelihood of success in social engineering attacks is that they usually create unusual circumstances. And in unusual circumstances, our cognitive abilities decline. Human beings generally think less and react more when faced with unusual circumstances, and that is a key aspect of a social engineer's attack. And then, of course, at the very bottom bullet there, statistics suggest that the average employee of an organization fails 4 social engineering attacks with a little feedback before becoming what we term inoculated from social engineering attacks. So it takes repeated failure before all of the hallmarks of a social engineering attack are readily recognizable by us humans, and social engineers take advantage of that to increase the likelihood of their success. And it's true that there are some organizations that have found that a certain fraction of their employee base can never be inoculated against social engineering attacks. They're just going to continually fall for social engineering attacks. A lot of engineers and really smart people who may be operating somewhere on the autism spectrum will never get the irony or the imitation or the sarcasm involved in a conversation, and those things are just lost on them. And it's just a brute fact that a certain small fraction of the human population will never become inoculated to social engineering attacks. And so the little cartoon we see on the left there is really how it happens in our world. What you see right there is a typical Thursday morning in the penetration testing business. We have all kinds of technical attacks going on, and there's all kinds of strange widgets and tools and scripts that we use. But by far, the easiest way to succeed in an attack against one of our client organizations is to pick up the phone or send an email or show up in person and act like we belong there. And that's why social engineering is so likely to succeed. Now, the other half of our risk formula is impact. So social engineering is very likely to succeed. It's also very likely to have a high impact when it does succeed. And here's a little graphic to sort of illustrate why. We have all kinds of controls in place to protect those critical data that you see at the center of our diagram there. We've got physical controls, we've got authentication controls, we have privilege controls and user rights and application controls. And all of those things are great, all those layered defenses. But the brute fact of the matter is, a person with a set of credentials can cut through all of those controls and get at those critical data. So social engineering attacks are very likely because of our assumption of truth in our interactions with other human beings. They're very high impact because if we can get through a social engineering attack something like a set of credentials or command and control of a computer that has privileges on the network, then we can cut right through all those security controls and get at the sensitive information that we're looking for. So social engineering is both a high likelihood endeavor and a high impact endeavor. And those are the reasons why social engineering attacks are so commonplace. So here we have a couple of quotes from sort of famous or infamous people in the hacking world. Bruce Schneier there, he's really considered by many to be sort of the grandpappy of modern encryption, computer encryption. And his quote is, amateurs hack systems, professionals hack people. And that is so true. And then Kevin Mitnick, famous or infamous social engineer who went to jail for social engineering 20 years ago, talks about how much money people spend on security solutions only to have them undermined by a social engineering attack. And these quotes really ring true for us as penetration testers. So we're going to talk about phishing in particular as a social engineering attack vector today. So here are some of the common types of phishing. So phishing, general phishing is typically casts a very wide net, not really targeting anybody in particular, just taking a list of email addresses and sending out that attack. It's very common attack technique for, say, ransomware campaigns, where the attacker doesn't even really know who they're targeting. There are a number of well-documented ransomware attacks where organizations like hospitals were brought down by a ransomware attack, and the attacker didn't even realize that they were, risking people's lives by shutting off biomedical equipment in their attacks. It's just an anonymous casting of a wide net. Now, we're going to talk more about spearphishing today. And spearphishing is more of a targeted phishing attack where there's some knowledge or some target of an industry where maybe there's some timely subject matter, perhaps portraying some insider knowledge, often uses spoofed email addresses. So mocking up an email from outside of an organization that looks perhaps as if it originated from within an organization. Whaling is another type of spear phishing where executives are targeted. Vishing is a common phishing technique that's performed via the telephone. Or smishing is also a term that we hear for using SMS messaging or text messaging to perform a social engineering attack. And then lastly, there are search engine phishing, aka domain squatting, where there are web pages spoofed. Normally, an attacker in this scenario would take the common spelling of a domain, such as abcbank.com, and make one slight misspelling, or turn the .com to a .org or to a .bank, and thereby set up a spoofed web page that would try to attack customers or would-be customers to the wrong destination. So those are the common types of phishing. Just one historical note down there at the bottom for those of you not as old as I am. The PH in phishing gives a nod to first-generation hackers who hacked telephone systems before there was an internet. Computers connected to each other via modulator, demodulator, or modem devices, and those devices demodulated a carrier frequency for a telephone carrier into back into a computer frequency, and so those folks were known as phone freaks. And yes, I'm old enough to remember the phone freaking days. And of course, the statistics support the assertion that phishing is highly likely to be successful and highly likely to be high impact. Here we see just a few data from the 2019 Verizon Data Breach Investigations report that show here phishing as the top threat action that leads to breaches for 2018, very common. And then here we see the delivery methods for malware, and of course, over email is by far the most common delivery method. And that Verizon Data Breach Investigations report is considered to be a well-researched industry standard report with thousands of examples. So, what's the impact of a successful phish? Real common impacts include things like Bitcoin mining or ransomware extortion. Bitcoin mining is where we just take a computer that has extra unused processor cycles and use those processor cycles to try to generate matches for Bitcoin hashes. This is a very widespread attack technique. It is actually believed to be the #1 method for bringing cash into the North Korean economy is through Bitcoin mining, unsuspecting recipients of Bitcoin mining attacks. Ransomware is simply encrypting the contents of your drive or drives and then extorting you for payment in order to get a decryption key. If the phish is going after credentials, then things like VPN remote access or webmail access are very common results or impacts. And then, of course, from there, from any or all of these attack techniques, compromise of the affected system or of that affected system and all the systems that it's connected to may be a possible outcome or impact of a successful phish attack. So that's kind of our definition and the sort of the lay of the land of what we're looking at in terms of phishing attacks. So next, let's look at a couple of common phishing techniques. So first of all, we are going to focus on spearphishing here a little bit more than just general phishing. And normally a spearphisher is going to begin with an information gathering phase. So they're going to target an industry and or a particular company or group of people within that industry, and they're going to do a little homework first. So they're going to do some Google searches. They're going to look at social networking websites. They're going to look at digital footprinting exercises like we see a little diagram of here on the right. We're going to take the target's domain name for that company, and we're going to map everything connected to it to get a feel for what they're doing, who they're connected to. Look at the organization's website. We may call the receptionist and get further information on people, what they're selling, what they're doing, things like that. Vendor press releases. We love vendor press releases bragging on what they just sold your company. That's a great way to gain information about the type, nature, or version of systems you have in place. And maybe we'll use that information in our phishing attack. Tech support forums that IT personnel often visit. Newsletters and annual reports are very common. We like to dial voicemail systems after hours just to get the lay of the land. We can collect names, titles, extensions, and so forth. Business and DNS registration records, which are normally part of the public domain. And then, of course, there's all kinds of business networking sites, LinkedIn, Jigsaw, ZoomInfo, those types of folks from which we can gather lots of information about our targets. So this is the kind of information that goes into a spear phishing attack to craft something more targeted against our victim. So a common Spearphish scripts include everything from security patches to wellness programs and surveys. Fundraising efforts are very common. New systems or software, payables or receivables or checks that need to be cut, those types of things. RFPs and business opportunities, job applicants with resumes attached to their emails. Contest winners, and there's our first, for those of you following for CPE credits, there's our first CPE code word there. Angry customers, customer complaints are very common Spearphish scripts. And then on the other side of angry, we have friendly. So we have things like friendly banks saying, oh, something is wrong with your account. Let's help you out with that. And these are very common spearphishing scripts. So let's look at a couple of examples of these. First, just a general phish example. This is one many of you may have found in your inboxes. This is a very widespread phish where someone allegedly on Craigslist wants to make an offer for something I've posted on Craigslist. In this case, of course, you can see that it's an email to recruiting@info@risk. That's an old domain name of ours. So this is not a spearphish attack. This is just sent out to some email that somebody has on a mail distribution list, and they're just casting as wide a net as possible. And be on guard if you click on that link. Here's what a more sophisticated spearphish, though, is going to look like. So in this example here, we've got a sender name that's been spoofed. So in this case, this is an email that we have contrived here at BPM, and we're sending it to one of our customers. Let's consider that customer to be ABC Bank. So we're sending this phishing email to the employees of ABC Bank. And what we've done is we have spoofed up the sender's email address so that it looks like it's coming from within ABC Bank, not from some outsider, right? Here in this case, we got an email coming from someone at gmx.com. Well, that's not within my organization. When we see a spoofed email that looks like it came from within our organization, we're going to be much more likely to believe that that is a valid email. In this example here, we actually have two because we've hit the reply button and found out that it's not actually from who it appears to be from. And then we've got a topical subject matter. So in this case, an upgrade of the telephone system. So in this case, we saw a vendor press release bragging about the new phone system that they just sold to ABC Bank. And so we're going to use knowledge of that new phone system as our subject matter. We're going to have a link in here that appears to be a valid URL from ABC Bank. We need everybody to take a survey about this new phone system upgrade. So click on the link and take the survey. Now, in this case, we're actually hovering our mouse over this link. And if you look in the bottom here, you'll see this link is not going to abcbank.com at all. It's going to some place called enterprisehost.com, which is just a domain that we own for our attack purposes. So it appears to contain a valid URL, but that URL is not valid. And it's demanding an activity that seems harmless. You have to take this survey. But it's just a survey. There's nothing wrong with a survey. We're not asking you for your mother's maiden name or your what city you were born in or your 5th grade teacher's name. We're just asking you to take a survey. So it seems harmless. Now, of course, when users click on that link, they're asked to log in before they take that survey. And of course, that login process allows us to harvest their credentials. So it demands an activity that seems harmless, but is not harmless. In other phish techniques, this link may go to a website that has been embedded with a malicious payload that, given the version and type of browser that you're using, and whether you have scripting enabled or not, might take advantage of your browser and just breach your system directly. And then the last thing that a sophisticated spearphish likes to do is tempt the recipient with in this case, a gift card reward. Who doesn't want a free cup of coffee, right? This is a technique used by phishers to engender a sense of urgency. So we want the recipient of the email to feel like they need to respond right away. So we're only giving, in this case, we're only giving out that gift card to the first 10 employees. If you're not one of the first 10, you don't get the free cup of coffee. And the reason we want to incite that sense of urgency is that we want you to click now. We don't want to wait until someone in the organization has found out about this phishing attack and a warning email comes out from the help desk warning everybody about this phishing attack. We want you to click now so that we can take advantage of you before you are alerted to the phishing attack. So that's sort of the anatomy of a sophisticated spear phishing attack. Now, a few more examples from our inboxes here. Here we see an example of someone impersonating a CEO. So in this case, Jim Wallace is the CEO of BPM. And so one of our employees here at BPM CPA received an email allegedly from Jim. Now, this isn't a very sophisticated one. You'll see here, this is just from some Gmail account, doesn't appear to be from within bpmcpa.com. And they just need you to complete a task. Again, we're asking for something that seems completely harmless. I'm not the CEO asking you to wire $100,000 to my offshore account. I'm just asking you to complete a task for me. And I'm the CEO, so you better complete it. So reply. And then once the unwitting victim replies, then the conversation begins about how to wire money or something like that. But the initial hook is very innocuous. It's not threatening at all. Here's a very common spearfish example that we see all the time these days, and a lot of ransomware and Bitcoin mining attacks result from spearfishes that target human resources. So here you are, how you doing? My name is Shauna, and I'm interested in a job. Here's a copy of my curriculum vitae. The password for the document is 1234. Look at that. I've even password protected my document. Aren't I security aware? The problem is this document contains a malicious payload. And if an unwitting HR recipient opens this document and has macros enabled in Microsoft Word, it is going to execute that malicious payload. So very common attack technique these days. Here we see something targeting tech firms. So this happens to us all the time, being in the technology business. Here's somebody from Princeton University, wants us to quote Seagate backups and whatever. This is a pretty good Phish email. Here you can see they've used a domain, princetonedu.net. Now that's not actually Princeton University. Princeton University's domain ends with a .edu, not a .net. But this is a pretty good attempt to try to create sort of a halfway spoof. And this is a senior buyer, so we certainly want to be friends with Zach, because Zach is a senior buyer and we want to sell stuff. So a very common, slightly sophisticated, not the world's worst phishing attack here. Here we see a really nice attack. This is the same type of attack. This is somebody impersonating a buyer who wants, in this case, to solicit proposals for the purpose of entering into the contract with the Food and Drug Administration. Isn't that wonderful? And what we see here in the lower right is this is a web page from the Food and Drug Administration. And if you look down on the bottom here we have Jonathan Ferguson. So this attacker has taken a legitimate name and a legitimate title that they found in the public domain, and they've kind of mocked up a semi-spoofed email address. I don't know how well you can see it here, but this is from @hhs.gov.org. And of course, that's not right. A government domain would not be a .org. A government domain would be a .gov. But it's pretty close to the casual viewer. And so obviously the hope here is the victim will believe that this is a buyer, and who doesn't want to have a contract with the FDA to sell stuff? That sounds like a way to retire young. So here you can see I've actually hit, this came into my inbox, I actually hit 2 and found that they had actually mocked up a nice little email domain to receive responses to this phishing attack. Here we see one targeting specifically CPA firms. So this is real common attack technique, very similar to the HR attack where someone has attached a resume with a malware payload embedded in it. In this case, they've got tax documents, alleged tax documents, and it's a PDF file format, but PDFs are very easy to embed malicious payloads into it. So here are my tax documents. Please prepare a draft and let me know. Now this one is not very well written. It kind of looks like, English as a second language there, but it is a very common phishing technique. Beware those attachments, Word documents, PDF documents, Excel documents. It's a trivial matter, image files, it's a trivial matter for attackers to embed malicious payloads into those types of files. And here's the friendly bank phish. So the friendly bank is writing to tell us that our security key has been compromised, and you better click on this, whatever this Wells Fargo keys account 5 page 2.html link is. That's a dangerous looking link right there. And it's not just that link, right? We've got a reply to button, we've got a not interested button, we've got an unsubscribe button, we've got a learn why we did this button. Every one of those links leads to the same malicious destination. So they've embedded this email with 6 different ways to get to the malicious web page, not just one. So this one is replete. This is a real shotgun attempt to get you to click on a link, even if it's the unsubscribe link. Very nasty attack technique. So, if you click on one of these links, you open one of these attachments, this is a message you may find after you've clicked. And that is a typical ransomware message, just a README message, opened up here in Notepad. Your network has been penetrated. All the files have been encrypted, and you want to get them unencrypted. You better reach out to Andy, which of course is a fictitious name, at Proton Mail or Tuanota Mail, and those are common encrypted email platforms. And if you get this message, you really have one of 2 choices. Comply and pay them a couple of Bitcoin and hope that they will give you the decryption key, or hope that you could have good offsite backups that are not connected to the system, that have not become encrypted, that you can easily recover from. Really only 2 choices there. So those are some common phishing examples. Here we have some Vishing examples of voice phishing scripts, or Vishing. So, we've all heard the tried and true Vishing things. We come home at the end of the day, and on our answering machine at home is someone impersonating Microsoft tech support, or the IRS, or law enforcement, or the Social Security Administration. And there's an action against us, and we better get out our credit card and pay right away, or that action is going to lead to us getting, indicted or something. And they're very common. They have become more sophisticated over time. Just a couple months ago, we came home and got a really good phishing email on our answering machine, allegedly from law enforcement. And it was left by someone who had great command of English. They showed no accents or English as a second language. And there was a crime that may have included us as a victim in that crime. And Detective Smith really needs to talk to us right away to find out if indeed we were a victim of that crime. And we should call Detective Smith back at 555-1212 or whatever. And it was a really good message, sounded great. It was so good, it was left for my wife. It was so good that my wife actually called the local police department to ask for Detective Smith to make sure that it was indeed a Vishing attack. And of course, the police department said there is no Detective Smith. That was a Phish attack. But it was so good that we had to validate. Now, of course, we validated by calling the police station at its known good number. We didn't validate by calling back the number the alleged detective had left for us. Don't ever reply to those numbers. Reply to the known good numbers. And there's all kinds of new attacks these days. So again, here's your friendly bank, right? So the bank fraud officer calls up and says, your account is showing fraudulent activity. Let's talk about that. Let's get your password changed. Why don't you give me a new password and let's get that changed? Or impersonating a company rep, often with spoofed caller ID. Your credit card at Acme Company has been compromised. I'm sorry, you're part of a breach. We're really sorry about that. If you could just give us a little information, we'll make sure and get your information tracked down on the dark web and get you off the list. Or complaints department. We see this all the time when people leave either positive or negative feedback on Yelp or Google reviews or something. Those people are then targeted for attacks. I'm calling about your recent Yelp review. Thank you for the nice things you said. Or I'm really sorry to hear that you had a bad experience. How can we help you with that? You know what? I'm really sorry about that experience. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to drop you an email. Why don't you give me your email address? And on that email is going to be attached a gift certificate. So we're going to send you a $50 gift certificate for your troubles. And who doesn't want a $50 gift certificate, right? But of course, the gift certificate is fraudulent, and there's a piece of malware embedded in the attachment. And those are targeting sort of end user customers. There are also attacks targeting employees. So vendor tech support is a very common one. We call up and say, yeah, hi, this is David with vendor support here. We were doing some patching last night. Everything went really badly. You know what? We need you to open your browser and let's go get the patch for your machine. That kind of thing. Again, human resources submitting a resume is often started with a Vishing script. So, hi, my name is David. I want to apply to a job. Where do I send my resume? That way, the person in HR is expecting it. So it lends credibility to the attack so that when we get that resume in our inbox, we're more likely to click on it and open it. Customer service and or help desk. Again, complaints or emergencies. Accounting, change of vendor payables address. There's a big example of a university in Canada that sent tens of thousands of dollars to an alleged vendor who had their receipt address changed. An urgent payment or expenses. And we're going to see a headline in the next slide here about an AI or artificial intelligence aided C-level voice deepfake, where they actually impersonated the voice of the CEO. And here we see the example of that here in this Wall Street Journal article from back in August, where the CEO of the organization had given a talk. The attackers had taken that talk and used an artificial intelligence voice recognition system with machine learning to learn how that CEO spoke. Once the AI system figured out how the CEO spoke, they then created their own message. And the message was, this is David, the CEO, calling in maybe to the controller or CFO saying, we need to get a payment out to so-and-so right away. This is urgent, needs to happen. And it sounded for all the world like it was the CEO talking because they had impersonated his voice so well. And here we see some other Vishing scams from recent headlines. In England, an ex-police officer was scammed out of $30,000. In the lower left here, this is a recent one that really is malicious. People find out from social media or whatever that you have a child, and then they call you to tell you that they've kidnapped your child. And if your child happens to not be home at the time that call comes in, you might be tempted to wire money to get them released. So Vishing is definitely on the rise. And there are other types of Vishing and Smishing going on with things like chat tools and Amazon Echo and Google Home. So in the top left here, this is a very recent headline from early this month for a WhatsApp vulnerability. Now, WhatsApp is a wonderful tool, an encrypted messaging tool, but a vulnerability allowed what's known as a stake and a graphic attack, which is embedding malware in an image or video into a little GIF, right? People send around GIFs on their messaging platforms all the time. And so it's very, very common. And as a result of this GIF, you can end up with your chat sessions files and messages all being disclosed to the attacker. Here in the lower right, we see an attack technique used against Amazon Echo and Google Home devices, those types of personal assistant devices where there's been some kind of breach of the device, and the way to turn that breach into something monetizable is to send the message then to the home that says, hey, your device needs to be updated. Please confirm your password and we'll effect the update. And of course, there's no update. They just want the password so that they can use that password against you. I see we have a chat message here. We'll send a copy of this presentation. The answer is yes. We will send the presentation to all attendees. You'll get it in your inbox. And no, it will not be a phishing email. So we'll send a recording of this presentation, and it will not have any malware embedded in it. So a little bit now to wrap up here on how we can avoid becoming a victim of some of these types of attacks. So just general overall social engineering warning signs. So not just phishing or vishing warning signs, but overall general social engineering warning signs. An attacker who requests anything out of the ordinary, anything unusual, help you with a problem you didn't know you had, such as there's a problem with your computer, there's a problem with your Microsoft tech support, etc. You didn't know you had a problem, but somebody's there to tell you that. You need that upgrade on your Amazon Echo. Or some kind of offer that sounds too good to be true, right? If it sounds too good to be true, it almost certainly is. Social engineering warning signs include claims of authority or name drops. You know, I'm working with so-and-so, the CFO, or I'm working with so-and-so, the IT director, or there's some kind of urgency to it. This is something we got to handle right away. We missed this and it's going to be a problem. Oftentimes some kind of cavalier or sort of sardonic attitude like, listen, you just need to comply with me right now. Oftentimes you'll see them complimenting you, flattering you, flirting with you. People are much more compliant when they're being addressed as a superior or as someone that the attacker wants to know. Promises rewards or threats for non-compliance. Or most importantly, you need to make sure that you ask for supporting information. And if they refuse or get uncomfortable when you ask for supporting information, that should be a red flag that there's some kind of warning that this is a social engineering attack. And just be reminded, everybody is the security officer. And that doesn't matter whether you're in IT or whether this is your personal life and not even part of your business experience. You are the security officer in your organization, and you are the security officer in your personal life. No one else is going to watch out for you against these social engineering attacks. So specifically for phishing emails, we look at our example of a sophisticated email attack again. And here are the things on the right that we want to do to make sure and not fall for these phishing attacks. So hit reply and check to see if the recipient's name is the same as the sender's name. If the topic is unusual, beware. Anything out of the ordinary should be suspicious. If it offers something for nothing or sounds too good to be true, it is. If it asks you to provide anything at all, think twice before complying, especially if it asks you to provide credentials. Hover over those links to ensure they're going where you think they're going. And if you are on a touchpad device where you cannot hover over that link, you should think twice about clicking on it and putting your finger over it. You might want to wait until you have a pointing device from which you can hover over. Check signature blocks. signature blocks are a good way to identify a phish. Many organizations, particularly if it's an internal phishing attack, have very distinct signature blocks. I know we do at BPM. And if I see an email from someone purporting to be from BPM, but their signature block looks a little out of the ordinary, I'm going to be suspicious. And then lastly, beware of attachments. You should make sure that you are not clicking on any suspicious attachments. Forward it to the IT team. Let the IT team open it on an isolated machine or Linux system that may not fall prey to the same type of attacks. So for businesses, for email controls that you have in place, here are some key protections. First of all, prohibit email address enumeration. So email servers are typically set up to reply to the sender of an email with a bad address. And by replying and saying this address is bad, the attacker can then use a brute force attack technique and the process of elimination to determine which ones are good. Prohibit email address spoofing. This is easier said than done. There are lots of different ways to spoof emails. It's kind of like a high-tech game of whack-a-mole that you have to play to get all of those different types of spoofing prohibited. Not simple to do, but very important. And then prohibit malicious attachments. See tools like Mimecast or Barracuda. There are lots of tools out there. That's just a couple that do a really good job of inspecting incoming emails, attachments, to make sure that there are no executable payloads embedded in those attachments. And for Word and Excel, unless your job requires you to have macros enabled, you should have them disabled. Macros are just little snippets of programming code that will allow the code to be executed. And of course, it's executing the malware payload that the attacker wants to do. And similarly for malicious links, again, tools like Mimecast and Barracuda, there's lots and lots of them out there. I'm not endorsing those in particular, just a couple of commonplace examples. And disable scripting in your browsers. That's something that many of you probably don't want to do, but scripting in browsers is very, very sort of analogous to macros in Word and Excel. Scripting allows snippets of code to get executed within your browser. Now, if you disable scripting for your browser, your browsing experience is going to be degraded because there's lots and lots of scripts that occur while you're browsing the web, and 99.9% of them are completely harmless. But it's defending against that 0.1% that leads us to disable scripts in our browsers. And just for sort of personal safe computing with email, you know, if you must use email for sending or receiving sensitive data, use encryption tools like PGP or Zixmail. If you're going to use personal email, consider encrypted email apps like Hushmail and ProtonMail. Again, I'm not endorsing any of these particular solutions, but these are very commonplace ones. Sanitize the contents of your inbox, your sent box, your trash. And what we mean by sanitize, we mean delete the sensitive information. We're all guilty of using our mailboxes kind of like filing cabinets where we store stuff. If there's sensitive stuff in emails, save it someplace secure, delete the email, and then empty your trash so that it's not there. People's mailboxes get breached all the time, and they're a treasure trove of sensitive information. If you are using email from a remote, your business email remotely, use multi-factor authentication. Go to the trouble of getting a Google Authenticate one-time password or something. If you must send sensitive attachments and emails, password protect those attachments. Put passwords on that Word file or that PDF or that Excel file, and then send the email, but do not send the password in the next email. Send the password over a text or over the phone or some other communications medium that is not email. That at least will require the attacker to have compromised more than just your email system to take advantage of it. And better yet, don't use email for sensitive information exchange at all. Use things like Dropbox or Box. Again, not endorsing them, but they're very common tools out there. And use them with multi-factor authentication. Going to the hassle and trouble of multi-factor authentication is essential. And then phishing and vishing defenses, just to catch up on the latest and greatest. Keep your phone and your messaging apps patched and updated. Most common attacks against mobile devices take advantage of missing patches. Disable scripting on your smartphone browsers, right? Just like we saw before for clicking on links. Be suspicious of all pop-ups and dialog boxes, and you should consider a pop-up blocker. Now, again, a pop-up blocker is going to degrade your experience. There are a lot of completely harmless pop-ups out there. You know, GDPR requires, the European privacy data regulation, GDPR, requires websites get you to opt in to things like their cookie exchanges and stuff, and they execute pop-ups to do that. And it seems perfectly harmless. But here we see on the right here example of a very common online banking toolkit that uses a pop-up that just asks you to click on a certificate, a security certificate, and it's going to install a malicious root certificate on your system. And last but not least for phishing, do not trust caller ID. Someone calls you on the phone and they purport to be a person who needs something from you. Ask them not to be offended, but tell them you're going to hang up and call them back at a known good number. If someone from Chase Bank is calling me to tell me that I've had fraudulent activity on my computer, then I'm going to go onto the web to Chase's website. I'm going to look up their fraud 800 number, and I'm going to call back that number. I am not going to talk to somebody who's called me. And if they're not at that number, well, then it was a fraudulent call in the first place. And as we saw in the AI vishing attack example, you can't even trust voice recognition, even if it sounds like the CEO's voice. Again, ask them not to be offended, but you're going to call back at their known good office or mobile number so that you can validate that it is indeed them. And any of you who have worked with us know that you can't just call us and engage us in a conversation about what's going on with our penetration test. If you call us to engage in a conversation, we are going to hang up and call you back at a known good number to engage in the conversation about the results of our penetration test or whatever. That is our documented protocol to avoid vishing attacks. So some common defenses against vishing. So that's it. We're going to wrap up here in just a moment. For reminders, for those of you taking this seminar for CPE credit, you will be receiving an email from Joel at BPM CPA. And if you don't trust it, hit reply and make sure it's from Joel before you proceed to the link in the email that he's going to send. And that email will contain a link to a SurveyMonkey survey, and you'll fill it out with the code words that we recovered here, and you will get your credit. We expect that this will happen sooner rather than later, so you can get your question. And to Gail's question, yes, we will provide you with a recording of this presentation so that you can refer back to it. Again, that email will probably come from Maggie in our marketing department. Please feel free to hit the reply button and make sure that it's going back to Maggie at BPM CPA, just like it purports to be have sent from her. So very, very key. Hit that reply button if you're not positive about the email, and make sure it's going back to who it purports to be sent from. So in conclusion, we'll wrap up right on time here. Social engineering is effective because human beings operate under the assumption of veracity or the assumption of truth. And that makes us all vulnerable to social engineering attacks. So that's why social engineering is so likely to succeed. And of course, it's very impactful because we have the privileges to access sensitive systems and data that need to be protected. Phishing is the most common and successful social engineering attack vector, and it can include, impacts can include Bitcoin mining, ransomware, or worse, complete command and control of your systems. So identifying phish attacks requires constant vigilance. It requires us to stop, take a second, think about the call or the email that we just received, not just respond sort of instinctively reactionary, but respond in a thoughtful fashion, stop and think about it, hit the reply button, hang up and call back at a known good number, and really inspect things, provide defenses such as restricting macros, restricting scripting to keep up that constant vigilance required to identify those phishing attacks. So that's it. That's all we had for you today. Any questions or comments at this time? All right, well, I think that was a pretty straightforward subject matter, so probably not a lot of questions there. Thank you all for your time and attention. Again, we'll get a copy of this presentation in your inboxes as a legitimate email. And go forth and fight those phishing attacks. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.